All right, good morning, everybody. Do we have a good audio check in y'all's room there at the Florida Gables?
We're looking good over here, Forrest.
Outstanding. Well, good morning, everybody. This presentation is going to be given by myself, Forrest Hester, and our new co-chair, Mr. Ron Sokol. I'll be making introductions and giving some background onto Ron Sokol. We also have a very special guest speaker today, Mr. Phil Duane, who's going to be stepping in to give us some insights into the market and also the ability to put some foresights into what we're coining Scaffolding Plus, the addition of access equipment to your already successful scaffolding business. So just to give a little bit of background on myself for those of you that don't already know me, or we haven't had an opportunity to sit and get to know one another's business. My name is Forrest Hester. I'm an active member of the ANSI A92 committees, as well as the ISO TAG. I am your chair for the AWP Council, but in addition to that, what we do on a daily basis is I own and operate a company called Tutus. Tutus is a drop prevention product. So if you were able to make the Fall Protection Council's meeting, that their topic of discussion was certainly near and dear to my heart, as we are a solutions provider in that marketplace, but specifically to access equipment. What I would like to do now, though, is really give some background into our new co-chair, Mr. Ron Sokol. Ron Sokol is a very good friend of mine, based out of Texas City. I've known him for quite some time and was very pleased that he accepted the invitation to become a member of the SAIA, really step in and assist the council as we move forward from ensuring that, you know, all perspectives are being reached out to. So I think the best thing that I can do is really take a minute to go through and read this for those of you in the room that may have a bit of trouble reading it from where you're at. Mr. Sokol has served as president and CEO of SCTC for the past 30 years. He is a seasoned safety and health professional with extensive experience in construction safety, petrochemical safety, and safety program development and management. His field experience and management skills provide a strong foundation for developing and evaluating realistic and cost-effective safety and health programs. Mr. Sokol is a certified safety professional with over 38 years of experience in construction safety, working for Bechtel prior to joining SCTC. He serves on the NIOSH NORA Construction Sectors Council, NCCER Safety Resource Committee, and is active with the American Society of Safety Engineers, now ASSP. In 2015, ASSE named Mr. Sokol an ASSE Fellow, recognized his lifelong commitment to protecting people, property, and the environment. Mr. Sokol has served on the ASSE Governmental Affairs Committee from 2007 through 2014, and as the ASSE Construction Practice Specialty Administrator from 2000 through 2004. In July 2016, Mr. Sokol was appointed by former Labor Secretary Perez to serve as one of the 2 public representatives on the OSHA Advisory Committee on Construction Safety and Health. Mr. Sokol has appeared before OSHA to comment and testify on various construction safety regulations throughout his career. So as we get started, and where we're beginning today is to, you know, continue forward on an ongoing project. And that ongoing project is the gaps analysis that we've talked about in previous annual and committee weeks. But we have a new addition to our council, and that is going to be a virtual platform that has recently been launched by the SAIA. The staff has now gotten all of our login credentials completed, and we're just going to be taking some time to really walk everybody in the council on how to navigate this program, how to access the documents, how to use it effectively, and really just give a broad overview on, what you need to know so that you can get in, where you're going to find the documents you're looking for, and also just to have contact information so that you can reach out to either myself or Ron with questions. So beginning, this is the front page. Once you've logged in, this is what you're going to find. But first, we have to get you there. So the process for gaining access starts with the acceptance of an invitation to join. And subsequently, there will also be credentials associated to your membership login. So if you already are actively using the membership portal, you're using your credentials to log in, there's going to be a link embedded inside of that portal so that you can access the community side of this program. If you're not a member, we absolutely want you to join. And for participants that have shown an interest in getting involved with the gaps analysis that are not current SAIA members, if approved by the board to collaborate based on expertise and willingness to collaborate, they will not have access to the community. The community is exclusive to our members. It's going to be a much more effective means of communicating and working through the programs. So we're absolutely encouraging all volunteers to this gaps analysis to be members of the SAIA, take full advantage of the programs that we've put into place, and to join. If you are attending this meeting as a guest and you're not already a member, but you have a willingness to participate in the gaps analysis, we have 3 key documents that we'll be working off of. Those 3 key documents will be talked about later in the slide, but we will have to be working on those outside of the portal. So there's going to be a little bit more of an exchange between information between you and I. So we'll start with the process. We would go to saiaonline.org. Once there, we're going to get our credentials. We're going to sign in, and you're going to see the welcome to the SAIA community. Once in here, you're going to have several options. You're going to have explore, connect, and engage. You're going to see a board on the bottom that just kind of gives you some activity and comments that are being read out. But where we're going to want to take you is to my communities. So if you look at the communities button, what you'll be able to find right next to it is my communities. Once you select my communities, these are going to be the different groups that you are assigned access to. And as you can see, we have a few of my communities here to kind of give you a reference. Then by clicking in, which for ours would be the MEWP Gaps Analysis Committee project, we're going to have a new set of documents. We're going to have our discussion board where we'll be able to communicate to each other on what's taking part as part of this gaps analysis, the library of resources, the blogs, as well as the members. The library portal is going to be extremely important for the fact that this is where all of the key documents are going to be stored. As we work on the documents and they're updated, this is where you're going to find the most recent information. And it's just going to be a landing page. If you're familiar with file share programs such as Dropbox or OneDrive, any of those sorts, you can really take a mindset that the library is that. It's a form of a shared file similar to Dropbox in the thinking. And that's where we're going to be keeping all of our documents. and providing you access to open them and collaborate. So these are the 3 key documents that we'll be working from. Now, whether you're accessing it because you're a member of the SEIA and you've gone to the library, or you are an approved kind of alliance partner with the gaps analysis to step in and collaborate, you're going to have a PDF file with a compilation of OSHA interpretation letters for access equipment. That resource is really to be used as a reference point because as we identify a gap, we're going to have to ask ourselves a question. Has OSHA already made a comment about this? Once that comment has been made and you've asked yourself, you know, has OSHA already made a statement? You would access your interpretation letters file to go through to get that answer, to understand, you know, what is the formal stance that OSHA has provided. That is going to be key in filling out the GAPS workbook as part of your rationale. Rationale is going to be a major part of the GAPS workbook in understanding not only what you're trying to achieve, but why you have come to the conclusion. I'm going to talk a little bit more on that component, but to simply put, as you're going through and filling out your GAPS analysis, it is from your perspective and from the industry that you represent, not the industry as a whole. Any participant on this GAPS analysis is really there because of their individual perspective based on the work that they do. So as we read what an ANSI standard says and what an ANSI standard achieves and how it affects your business and why it promotes safety for the workers that you have control over, does OSHA say something about that same topic? As an example, we can use a reference to fall protection, for instance. You know, what specifically is being said about fall protection and aerial work platforms between booms and scissors, and then what does the ANSI standard say? So if that is a topic of discussion, it affects your business, you're a participant on this GAPS analysis, and you wish to share, hey, I've really identified that, you know, OSHA doesn't have much detail on this subject of fall protection for scissor lifts. However, the ANSI standard says this. This is a relevant standard. It promotes safety. So you would use the rationale by combining the fact of what OSHA has already said through their interpretation letters, combining that together to fill out our GAPS workbook. That was very long-winded, but we're not yet done. We must now come to the incorporated by reference document. This is our 1969 standard for A92.2, which OSHA does recognize and has recognized since 1971. This document's been provided as another focal point because it'll be important to draw a connection to how the ANSI standards have changed. The A92.2 is specifically for bucket trucks, yet the new suite of standards 20 for the calculations and design of aerial lifts, the 22, the safe use of MEWPs, and the 24, which is the training of operators and supervisors for MEWPs, is not addressed in the 1971 document for A92. So that's a significant gap. We have a whole class of equipment that's not specifically covered under the A92.2. I'm trying to look in the room. Can I get a show of hands from anybody that does have an excitement for standard writing and getting into detail in this way? And I'm trying to look closely. I know that this is a subject of passion for many. and it is immensely valuable. And we truly appreciate all of those that step up to get involved with the GAPS workbook and to participate actively. But it is very detailed. So if this is the first time you've heard about the GAPS analysis with the AWP Council, and you need some background onto how it got started, how to fill out the GAPS workbook document, if you just have questions, there's a great resource available to you on YouTube. We'll provide the YouTube channel to you, but this is just an example of it. It's a snip. We're not going to play it, but it's about an hour-long video just walking you through the process of how to complete the workbook, how to step in and fill it out correctly, and you know, where your comments go, but also how to label your files appropriately when you save them, so that there is good visibility of who the comments have come from, and just from a documentation standpoint. So we're getting ready to really have a conversation with Ron Sokol and give y'all an opportunity to meet a very good friend of mine and your new co-chair. But before we do, I want to get some questions about the GAPS analysis. Perhaps there may be a question from the audience on, you know, what is the goal, or what is the timeline? And so I'm going to open up the floor and see if we can't get somebody to be the first one to step up this morning and shake off the dust. So the floor is open.
Hey, Forrest, is this where we work through the prepared questions that you and I are created in our mind?
I think so. So why don't you ask a few questions of this GAPS analysis, Ron, and we're going to take a moment and do your introduction. I really want to go through the flow of letting everybody meet you. Why don't you ask some of the questions and that you and I asked each other as we started this process?
You hold on one second, Ron and Forrest. We have someone that has a question.
Oh.
Hey, Forrest, it's Kevin here.
Good morning.
How are you? I got a question about the GAPS analysis and the evolution of the ANSI standards over the, I guess, since what, 1970, since incorporation, right, of the original. And is there any information anywhere over the years with the development, for instance, of envelope management as opposed to just standard factors of safety that might appear in 92.2, the original version? Is there any work being done or any analysis being done that you know of that would link reduction of certain classifications of accident or injury as the standards have been developed and adopted over the years?
So this is kind of a two-part answer. The question you're asking, I interpret, and the way that I'm hearing the question, it relates to the design of the equipments and how the design of the equipment may have changed over the years, and how that would be communicated in the GAPS analysis. Did I understand that correctly? That it's specific to the equipment's attributes and the equipment's design?
I think that's part of it, Forrest. I just use that as an example. I just mean that there are certain safe behaviors that are now or have been inspired by standard rewrites over the years that are not reflected in 1926. And, you know,
correct.
There are discussions that I've been having and I'm continuing to have with OSHA about how they need to look at ANSI standard, current ANSI standards for potential incorporation, based on the fact that all of the good work the industry has been doing through the standards over the years has obviously had a reduction in incident and accident. And I thought about, was there any information with regard to anybody who collected that information and categorized it in any sense?
There is. So it would be a bit of a short novel, but I think what you're bringing up is important to document, and I think we as an industry need to spend more time doing it. So I'll answer in this way: if we were to give OSHA an overview, the history of how these standards came about, we have to go back to 1990. In 1990, what we know is the suite of standards, the 20, the 22, and the 24, had a very different name. They predated the ISO standards. And they were actually collaborated out of a group of about 6 to 7 people, I believe. I think you would probably know them better than I. Their names do not come off the top of my head, but I do remember that there were 7. And this was under the EN standard. I think there was collaboration in the early days of IPAF for the development of really what we know to be the suite of standards. Once adopted in the EN and going through their process, they were later introduced, I believe in '98, to the ISO community. The ISO community did several rewrites of those standards, making their adaptations. And then in the early 2000s, I think there was several attempts to make updates and changes to the 0.5 and 0.6. At that point, discussions were held to do rather than a new standard, because a new standard is a rather daunting task, they continued forward with the 0.5 and 0.6, I believe, for 2 more cycles. And then that really puts us at the time that the SAIA became the Secretariat. So we're now, I believe, in around 2010 era. The SAI was already an active part as the Secretariat, but there was just some administrative changes that were taking place. I think there was more momentum by the industry to see the suite of standards come about. And at that point, the ISO community members really brought forth the opportunity to do a complete rewrite of what we know to be the ANSI standards, the ANSI suite of standards. But if we were to write it out as a timeline, and we were to share to the industry the history of these standards, they are nearly 30 years old. There has been 30 years of work and development on these suite of standards to make them come to life. And I think that as a community, that should really help us to understand why volunteering and being committed to this work is so important, because it does take so much time to get this adoption, even though we are very well aware of the safety. And so I know that information's out there, Kevin. I think we, as a few of the industry members, need to start documenting that history and putting it into our new community board with the SAIA, so that future AWP council chairs and AWP council members have access to it. And if for any reason some of that knowledge is lost for various reasons, the SAIA community board can be that landing place and that documentation port. Does that appropriately answer the question as in the way that you intended it on the timeline of change, or was there a different intent?
He's nodding his head yes. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Kevin. Are there any other questions from the audience? Ron?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry, I had a little technical difficulty, so I was a little tardy, but I'm here now. And I don't know if we started the day off with a safety moment, but I'd like to be able to do that for all of us today. Some of you may be aware, some of you may not be aware, but every April 28th in our nation, our Department of Labor takes a pause and remembers workers that have been killed in job site accidents and incidents. And today is April 28th. There's a group called the United Support for Memorial Workplace Fatalities that was a nonprofit that was founded a few years ago to try to help families cope with this loss that they have to do, a loss that no family should have to experience ever. And, you know, their loved ones get up, go to work to earn a living, be able to do the thing they enjoy, and won't come home today and will receive a knock on the door that will forever change their lives. So I'd like to just start, before I have some remarks, of just taking a moment of silence and pause and be able to acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do, and remember these families for their pain and suffering that they're having to endure, and something that in most cases could obviously be prevented. So let's go ahead and please take a moment of silence. Thank you. You know, that kind of brings me, as Forrest asked me to kind of, since I'm new to the group, to be able to kind of do a little overview about myself and where I come from and how I can help SAIA and move this ball forward on being able to protect people and have a workable standard. It's so much more than just having a standard and a set of rules. You know, one thing that I'm glad Kevin asked that question about ANSI, and you know, the reality is there's an ANSI suite of standards, and OSHA in my But I wanted to start by just kind of sharing just a story with you about a watershed moment in my life that really kind of will give you some insight in how I think and operate, and how I'm going to be able to try to be a benefit to this committee. But I was in my early 20s as a safety engineer for the Bechtel Group of companies on a large project in southeastern Montana. We were building 2 large power plants there for Montana Power Company, and we had about 5,000 people on site, and this was the first large construction job that I had worked on. And you know, 5,000 people is a lot of people to say grace over on a daily basis. And one particular day on the job, we had an iron worker for one of our subcontractors fall 145 feet to his death. And my job that day as a young safety engineer was I was sent up onto the structural steel with a body belt because harnesses didn't exist at the time. And we had a little fire truck with a pumper on it and a hose, and I latched that around to my belt, and I scooted up to the areas where he had fallen, and he had struck his head against a whole series of I-beams as he transversed down onto the turbine deck where he had perished. And my job that particular day was that I had to go up and scoot out onto every one of those beams, and I washed down pieces of that man's skull and brains and hair and everything else that was left behind. That moment changed my life, personally, vocationally, and has still been a driving force for what I try to do, even though it happened over 40 years ago. And so as we talk about this idea about creating something, it's so much more than just a bunch of rules on a piece of paper. It's about the people behind those rules and what we're trying to accomplish. I've been fortunate, as I'm 42 years in the construction industry, to be able to experience a lot of changes and see a lot of changes in safety and health. You know, I told you in that little example I just gave that, you know, I was using a body belt. Harnesses didn't exist. And if I look out onto the to the Zoom and I see us with gray hair, we remember a time when a body belt is all we had. Harnesses didn't exist, fall protection, fall arrest systems, safety in 1980 when this incident happened, and safety in 2021 looked completely different. And I'm so thankful. But the reality is we still are stuck in this kind of chasm where we continue to lose people from the 4 basic killers of falls, struck by, caught in, and electrocutions. And when we talk about that from aerial lifts and mobile elevated work platforms, every one of those major focus 4 that continues to take lives of Americans and citizens across this nation, they are areas of highest risk. Can you fall from an aerial work platform? Absolutely. Can you be struck by? Absolutely. Can you be caught in? I know of another fatality that happened in the Texas City area when I was working down there, where a man was less than 12 feet off the ground in an aerial lift, and he was a painter, and he was trying to get his aerial lift up underneath the pipe rack in order to paint. And at the time, he was trying to maneuver the basket, and when he did, his body controls, and there he got caught in between the pipe and the basket, and he suffered. He was asphyxiated. And the 2 workers that were down on the ground, they thought, well, what's he trying to hide? What's he doing up there? Because he hadn't moved. They didn't see any motion, and all they could see was really from the waist down. And then it occurred to them, maybe something is wrong. And they went ahead and enacted the emergency device and lowered the lift, and the man had perished. So that's a caught-in incident right there. And then do we need to say more about aerial lifts and power lines, right? So as we begin looking at this, we need to be the compelling agent to be able to get OSHA to be able to act on it. So to give you a little bit of my background, I worked with the Bechtel Group of companies for a series of years, 10 plus years. And then I took over a role as president and CEO of a nonprofit safety training center in Texas City, Texas, that would train around 20 to 25,000 people a year for 10 petrochemical facilities. And so in that role, I began to work with contractors and owners in order to be able to ensure that we elevated safety and health practices for the industry. So construction and petrochemical construction, industrial construction are areas that I've focused in on most of my career. I was very fortunate to be able to be appointed to the American Society of Safety Engineers at the time, now it's Safety Professionals, Government Affairs Committee back in early 2000. I was the longest serving member on the GAC for ASSP. And through those 7 years I served on that, I began to work within the circles of Washington, D.C. and begin to meet people from OSHA and NIOSH. And that led me to some appointments, first of all, as a member of ACOSH, which is the Advisory Committee for Construction Safety and Health. And if you're not familiar with ACOSH, ACOSH is the advisory group that is written into the OSHA construction standards that basically says that OSHA has to consult with ACOSH before they can publish any new safety rule for the construction industry. It is the only advisory group to OSHA that is written in the standard that's saying that ACOSH must be consulted and advise OSHA on construction industry standards. So the makeup of ACOSH is made up of 5 employer representatives representing businesses, 5 employee representatives, mostly representing the trade unions, 2 public representatives, 2 state representatives from state plan OSHA states, and then 1 individual from NIOSH Office of Construction Services. So that's the 15 members that make up. I was appointed in 2016 by Labor Secretary Perez, and then reappointed in 2018 by Labor Secretary Acosta. And hopefully I'll be reappointed in May of this year as all of the ACOSH members terms end May 21st of this year, and I resubmitted to be able to be reappointed by would be now Labor Secretary Walsh. So go ahead.
Ron, I want to recap. Can you relist those 5 groups that make up that council again?
Yeah, ACOSH is made up of 5 employer representatives, which are basically the building trades have representatives on there. 5 employer representatives, so that can be people from large construction companies. I know there's a lady from Turner is on there and other large construction companies. So that's the 5 employer representatives. There's 2 representatives from the OSHA state plan states. And currently it was 1 representative from the Kentucky Labor Council. And the second one was, I believe, from North Carolina, which is another state plan state. Then there's 2 public representatives that represent the general well-being of the American public. And that's really where I come in. So, you know, in that role, you can imagine the dynamics between the employer representatives and the employer representatives. But, you know, being a public representative, I'm here for the good of the American people. And so, you know, in that role, you know, as I'm trying to advise OSHA, you know, I want a standard that, if we talk about any standards, that would, first of all, protect people. I mean, that's the core of who I am. But it has to be a standard that employers can live with. Because if employers aren't going to live with that standard and have impact in it and be able to actively enforce it and utilize it as a risk management means to protect people, it's no good. I mean, if you have a standard no one's going to follow, then what have you accomplished, right? Other than having OSHA going out and enforcing it in a way, and then putting punitive penalties on those employers that don't comply. So, you know, a good example I'd like to give is, you know, the silica standard. You know, when the silica standard came out, people thought, oh man, this is gonna shut down the construction industry. I mean, you know, you're taking this silica, which we know is killing people long term. I mean, you know, silicosis has killed people and crippled people for years and years. And so when it first came on, employers were saying this is unreasonable, and OSHA came up with their table A of how to be able to control that. And what we're finding in the silica standard is that employers are saying, you know what, if I can comply with this and figure out a way to control the silica dust through wetting and other processes, I don't have to follow all this other stuff. And it has led to innovation of devices on tools to minimize the exposure of silica. So that's a prime example of how standards began to reshape how employers could work, but ultimately affected the employees not being exposed to silica. So, you know, when I think about, you know, the framework of how OSHA operates, as I've seen within ACOSH, is, you know, right off the bat, I'm going to tell you that they're not apt to just take a whole ANSI standard and say, this is it. They take bits and pieces of it. But, you know, with my involvement in governmental affairs, you know, there's a new individual that's going to be proposed to be the head of OSHA. OSHA has not had an undersecretary since Dr. David Michaels left in the Obama administration. Right, wrong, or indifferent, the Trump administration felt that wasn't important enough. You know what? I just that was a disservice to the American people. That may be a political statement that I just made, but you know what? Not having an undersecretary of labor to protect the working men and women of our country and not have that for 4 years of administration was definitely a disservice to the American people. And you may think that's political, but I think that's just an obvious statement that needs to be made. Now, the person who is now being proposed is an individual by the name of Doug Parker. I don't know Doug Parker, but he is an attorney. Let me tell you a little bit about his background. He served in the Obama administration as the undersecretary or second assistant secretary for MSHA, the Mine Safety and Health Administration. And if you don't have much involvement with MSHA, just think of OSHA on steroids. Their enforcement actions are way greater. The rules are tougher, stricter. There's a greater voice of labor. And as a result of MSHA and really the impact that labor has on it, mining fatalities are at an all-time low in our nation. Doug Parker was the assistant deputy for the Mine Safety and Health Administration. So number one, how do you think he's going to view enforcement? Secondly, he is currently the head of OSHA. So all of our members that are there, if you'd raise your hand, if you're in California or operate in California, if you want to get a sneak peek on how this OSHA may operate under the Biden administration, turn to OSHA. And, I just bring a couple of regulations about it in OSHA. One that involved the petrochemical industry was ensuring that there's qualified people to work in what are critical infrastructures like petrochemical or high hazardous locations, where those employers have to verify through California regulation of OSHA that people have the skills in order to do the jobs they're being hired for. And that was a regulation that came out 2 years ago in OSHA. I could see the same applicability where people are going to now say, maybe under the Parker administration of OSHA, if and when he gets confirmed, and it looks like that he probably will, people are going to look at aerial lifts and said, prove to me they have the skills and the abilities necessary to operate these pieces of equipment. And the one thing that I found in my dealings with OSHA and serving on ACOSH is OSHA likes to look at the current templates that they have and fit their rulemaking process into those templates. And so I can tell you one template that I could see them, if I had a crystal ball or was in the back room of their negotiation for rulemaking, that they could use is this idea about having a lift director that's written into the crane standard. In the crane standard, they wrote in that before you start lifting stuff, you're going to need to have a lift director. You're going to have a pre-lift plan. You're going to have a pre-lift meeting. I could see where OSHA, if they wrote an aerial lift standard, would start to say, okay, you're going to have someone that the equivalent of possibly a lift director that's going to be able to go out there that's competent and qualified. And those are words within OSHA that have specific meanings, to be able to assess the situation and do that pre-assessment. I could see where you're going to have to verify the training associated with it and have competency testing on it for specific pieces of equipment. The second thing that I think that OSHA would like to do is, if you look at the forklift standard and you look at what OSHA did with powered industrial trucks a few years ago when they rewrote that standard, and they said, you know what? We're going to make sure that the employers train on the particular powered industrial truck that they are operating. So when you kind of combine that logic between what they're doing in the crane standard with lift directors and what they've done in the powered industrial trucks with making sure the training is on a specific piece of equipment, I think that's probably a pretty good foreshadowing about what their mindset is regarding an aerial lift standard.
So Ron, I want to connect several things that were said with our group, and we're still in a question section. So if anything that has been said has provoked a question, please ask for the microphone. Please step forward. But the last part that was talked about, power trucks and cranes, is very important when we think about what's taking place with the gaps analysis. The new suite of standards, the point 22 and the point 24, address key elements that are already written into OSHA regulation for both the crane and for the mobile truck equipment, just from a requirement of training, documentation of that training, and all of the elements therein. That's what this gaps analysis is. That's what your involvement is to be. You're supposed to be coming in from a perspective of how your work and how your experience has taught you something about AWP operation and its use. And you know that there is one way that you're more than willing. Remember when Ron was talking about it's pointless to have a robust excellent standard if nobody's going to follow it. So if you're from a perspective that you're like, our companies already do this, it's written into every, bid contract. Nobody has an issue with following any of these rules, but there's no mention of it inside of an OSHA regulation. However, the ANSI standard does. And there's also other OSHA language that specifically addresses the same issue. On the line in the gaps analysis workbook, when you complete that, this is what the ANSI standard says. This is what the OSHA standard for AWPs does not say. Then you move to the next section saying, here are references of other areas similar that take part in this. And then the conclusion is not so much a suggestion, it's a documentation of facts. The rationale is not to be a perception of what should happen, it's just a documentation of what the gap is. So I wanted to take a moment there to really connect Ron's background and what he's sharing and how it all connects together. Ron's passion and the background of the incident that really, made him who he is a very well-known story within other communities, and it's not an easy one to hear. It's not an easy one to hear, but I think it is important that we all remember at the end of the day that we truly are here for that reason. I have not shared in a council meeting one of my passion drivers, but it is very similar to Ron's. The last 3 major construction projects that I was an active member on, we did have a fatality on job site. And if you've ever been a part of that experience, if you've ever had a close worker, a close friend, and you have been a part of that project, it sticks with you and you do not forget it. And these standards and our work really will contribute in a great way, even if it takes us 30 years. That story that we told with Kevin O'Shea's question is quite relevant. These things do take time, but we shouldn't lose focus or get dismayed.
If we continue on with some of the things, that OSHA is involved with, of course, they're going to come up with a COVID standard. They were pressed. There were some timelines that were set forth in January and then another one in March. But from what I'm told is that they already have a standard that they're reviewing. And just to understand the OSHA process on standard development is that they have to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking. And once they do that, they publish that in the Federal Register on what they want to be able to get comments on. Then they begin to build the case for the standard. People are allowed to submit their comments, and they begin to craft what the standard is. Once they come up with a proposed standard, then it has to go through a OMB review from Office Management and Budget. And then also there's another group called SBREFA, which is a Small Business Administration that has to look at it for the impact on small business. Now, in the Trump administration, when President Trump came in to office, he basically was governing through executive orders. And you may have heard a lot of comments about executive orders and what can be done and not done. Obama did it on chemical safety after the West explosion. There was an executive order on ammonium nitrate and hazardous chemicals. But the Trump administration had an executive order that said that OSHA or any regulatory agency within the government, just not OSHA, EPA, OSHA, other regulatory bodies, could not propose a new standard unless they retired 2 old standards. So for every 1 new standard, you had to get rid of 2 old standards. That executive order has been canceled, and that's no longer the case. So I do believe that you're going to see, some advanced rulemaking, probably more aggressive rulemaking associated with it. And this is an opportunity for us to be able to get front and center doing this gap analysis and guiding OSHA in a way in order to assist them through that. I can't emphasize enough the power that SAIA has as the secretariat over this group of standards. ASSP has been secretariat over a whole bunch of safety standards, and they've had a great impact on OSHA and how standards are written. So I think we have the same opportunity in order to do that as well. So,
we're very glad to have you, and we certainly appreciate your involvement, and I'm so glad to finally be able to introduce our council to you, and thank you for joining us.
Well, as the members are here, we have to come up with the standard that works for everyone. I mean, and that means that that's working for the manufacturer, that's working for the rental companies, it's working for the general contractors, but ultimately working for the employees as well. So, we have to look at it in all ways that people say, okay, I can live with that, and hopefully we can be able to have participants and stakeholders from all those groups that give us a balanced approach to manage this risk, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do is manage this risk. And when an aerial lift tips over or someone falls out or there's an incident regarding it, nobody wins. I mean, the manufacturer is going to be brought in, they don't win. The rental company is going to be brought into the lawsuit, they don't win. The general contractor, the subcontractor that's using it, the employee that's hurt, his family, nobody wins. And so we have to really kind of make sure that we look at that from all angles to manage risk appropriately and something that makes sense. And then, Forrest, I just want to say one more point. As we're looking at a multi-generational workplace that we have right now, from the greatest generation is off the workplace. Baby boomers like myself, we're winding down, and the millennials are in there, and then Generation X and Y and Z and whatever the next group is. But my experience in dealing with this is the fact that this newer generation, safety and health is just an expectation that they have, and
who do you consider to be the new generation?
Yes. I mean, it's just like,
who do you consider to be the new generation?
Oh, I'm probably thinking these workers that are going to be, anywhere from the 18 to 30 age bracket, that are ultimately, have grown up in a technology generation. They're not afraid of technology. They think that technology can serve and solve a whole bunch of problems. But, probably some of the issues that they struggle with is some of the soft skill and human interactions that are so important, that a baby boomer generation like myself, we were raised to, when you shake someone's hand, you shake it firmly and you look in their eyes and you make that contact and that connection. So, being able to understand that, and then secondly, this interface between the Internet of Things and automation and artificial intelligence and all the things that are right on the horizon. Yeah. I think probably putting humans in confined spaces to do work is going to be considered an archaic practice probably in the next 5 years. And, we're just not going to put people in IDL8 situations any longer. And, and so we have to realize the world is changing at a really rapid pace. And the people that are in the world think a little bit differently than maybe people used to think. And we have to take those issues into consideration when we're writing a standard, and how is that going to be received and perceived, and how can we best get people to manage the risk in a way that no one gets hurt, no harm to companies, environments, or individuals. Thanks.
I think we're going to make it happen, and I want to just take a moment to put my contact information up on the board. If anybody has questions about the gaps analysis, has an interest to be involved in the project, and is ready to collaborate. If the topics that myself and Ron have just discussed provoked an interest, if you've taken a liking to some of that thought, please reach out and use this contact information. We're getting ready to get our guest speaker on, Mr. Phil Duane, and it's going to be a very different change in atmosphere. We're gonna get out of the weeds of standard development and identification of risk, and we're going to move to making money and purchasing things and being active in the industry. I want to briefly bring up and make sure that everybody is aware within our council of the SAI and IPAF Alliance. There will be the use of the PAL card under the SAIA. We will have our own unique insignia on the back, the development and portion of appropriate standards and best practices. Where appropriate, addressing safety and regulatory bodies with a unified voice, and we'll be promoting the need for effective operator training. This is in addition to our already MEWP program with our mass climbing side with IPAF. It's a tremendous addition and moves us one step closer in our mission and core values here with the SAI Council. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Mr. Phil Duane. If you're not already familiar, he is an active podcaster and has quite the following. He's the host of Access Nation, covering the aerial industry news. Over 20 years of experience within our great industry, working with leading manufacturers such as Snorkel, Altec, and JLG. JLG was his last employer, if I remember correctly, before he went out on his own and started Shemp Wholesale. He is active in the brokerage business of aerial equipment, definitely has his thumb on the needle, and will be able to give us some great insight. So Phil, please, why don't you introduce yourself and give us an idea of what's to come.
Well, thank you for having me, everybody. And you know, just listening to Ron, I'm passionate about the lift business, or the MEWP side. So it's interesting for me to listen to. I know if you've paid attention to the podcast, I was really big on understanding the new standard as it changed, and maybe how it affected the job sites, and how a lot of the people that rent the equipment, how they'll react to some of it. And I have a lot of feedback on that. I don't know if we have a lot of time for it today, but about myself, I am from Northwest Missouri, and Snorkel's from St. Joseph. I got an opportunity to go work in the parts department there at about the age of 23. And once I got comfortable with the parts, then Snorkel would travel me. Then I get to meet all the equipment dealers. And back then there was equipment dealers for access equipment. And then Snorkel gets bought. It was OmniQuip, they get bought. And then through some of those transitions, I felt like I needed a little more stable place to work. And then Altec is in St. Joseph as well. And so I went to work at Altec as a parts marketing supervisor and helped them build get their parts distribution center established. And that was exciting. But once I left Snorkel, I missed the access, the construction type side of the business. And so I took a job with JLG as an outside parts rep. And there was two of us that were outside field reps that would go meet with the dealers and stocking parts, and of course in parts and rental, you're your own best customer. So getting the parts on the shelf versus all the next day orders was important. And so that's what we did. And we also upsold them on some of the programs and things that they would offer. So that was exciting. And that propelled me after a couple of years into the whole good sales. And in the whole good sales, I really enjoyed selling equipment and working with the dealers and the sales reps and being a part of the growth of the industry in that time, because it has grown by leaps and bounds since then. So that's a little bit about myself. About my company, I do a re-rental, which is always dealer to dealer. I will broker equipment for them, only dealer to dealer. It's a lot easier than dealing with end users and all the stuff that was required with them. So I'm more comfortable dealing with dealers. And I also have a rep agency, marketing agency. We selectively pick some of the manufacturers we like to work with. And so there's kind of 3 pedestals in my business. To promote my business, we looked at ads in different magazines, and I fell in love with podcasts, I don't know, 3 years ago, and there's not a podcast in the access industry. And so with the help of Christy researching it and things, I said, we're going to do one. And I don't know how well it'll go. And it sounds easier than it is because you put yourself totally out there for someone to say, hey, he's not that smart, or he's an idiot, or whatever. And so, but I felt comfortable.
Quite a following.
Yeah, it's growing, and it's fun because, you know, when you get approved by iTunes and it's on there, and then Christy can pull up the map and it's like, someone in China and Australia checked it out. I'm like, well, that's cool. And so it's been fun. And I use it to promote my business, and as well as just kind of help. The industry's gotten big. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of money in it. And when you get changes like we have with the standard or anything, I mean, I don't think you can give people enough knowledge as news. And,
No.
and when you're a rental rep for a rental company, you got to know about trenchers and skid steers and a whole gamut of equipment. And I don't know if anybody ever becomes a real expert at any of those in those situations, because it's hard to keep up with changes in all the equipment, but they do the best they can, most of them, I think. So it's exciting. So on to the first slide. And I think in this, when I talked to Forrest, I said, you know, a scaffold plus. And I thought about it last night. And one of the big things with, when you talk about scaffold or you talk about aerial equipment, is getting people in the air. So that's the whole purpose. We get people in the air. Now, there's several ways you can get people in the air. And ladders, right? People still use big ladders. In fact, in my way to the office today, the guy didn't have enough room, and he had a giant extension ladder on my way in. And I thought, you know, that's kind of the cheapest, probably only solution the guy had, unless he wanted to rent a bigger boom, and then cost comes into play. But, you know, those are the danger zones. When you listen to Ron speak and some of the others about safety, every day guys put themselves in the air. You know, it becomes, how much money do you have to be safer? And if he could afford to, you know, doing the roof job, if he could afford to rent an 80-foot boom, it's a much better way than that extension ladder he had. But some, you know, in the world we live in, people have to understand that cost plays into that. And so when we first started, I remember, you know, really coming to you, and in our last council meeting, I was surprised to hear how many of our already great members here with the SAI, they have these tremendous relationships that, you know, they're on the job site every single day, day in and day out with their customers. The scaffolding business is so unique in the fact that they get way more face time than a rental company could ever dream of having with their customers. And in that, I've learned that some of them have started bringing in some scissor lifts and thinking about bringing in boom lifts to add to their fleet. And then you came up and you brought up scaffolding plus, right? And understanding what scaffolding plus could be, and the advantages of just taking that relationship that already exists and expanding on it. What does that look like to you? Well, everything comes with a price. So, you know, if you do an analysis of getting in the air, and whether, let's say you're in scaffold business and you call on your customer, you have the relationship with them, and you spec the job out and you do the things, you go, okay, this boom would work, this boom would work. Here's how much it costs. Here's how much the scaffold costs to set up and set. And then you have to scale in the productivity. So how much more do I get done with an aerial work platform versus that? And that's in your relationships and your sales staff to do that. Drilling it in a little deeper than that. You know, if you want to compare rental, scaffold, or access rental versus scaffolding, it gets complex. And the bigger thing is the amount of money you have to spend on access equipment and the cost to own it, maintain it, having its inspections, all the things, is a lot more than scaffold. From the standpoint, scaffold doesn't have a decent motor. It doesn't have, you know, some of the things that, you know, the booms would have. It doesn't have tires that wear out and are very expensive. So there's there's another step up in cost. And I think when you talk about scaffold plus, and a lot of guys have both, but some don't. Some just have scaffold. I think you have to, you know, onto my next kind of slide I was going to bring up to is, you know,
Where do you start?
so the thing is this, if you had to spend 115,000 on a 60 foot boom with a 6-foot jib, okay, that's a lot of money. And the rental rate and how it scales the returns, which is safer, which your customer wants, I don't know. If you understand the business and you can find a decent boom that's rent ready, and you can curb your costs back to say 55, okay, and you know, slowly put your feet in the water to say, we've been missing deals for years. We're kind of scared. It's so competitive, and it is. If you go to any job site, there's booms everywhere, and there could be a gamut of stickers on the boom. There could be 3 different companies that have equipment on that job based off the relationship they have with the subcontractor or the contractor, whoever's on the job. But I want to eliminate that fear to say you don't have to make a giant investment to get your feet wet in the business. Also knowing that you're offering a safe alternative for your customer, and the whole purpose is to put people in the air. Now I want to talk about the opportunity real quick. You know, low level access is really yet to take off here. Okay, when I talk about low level access, I'm talking about the 10-foot push around stuff and those kind of things. In that, if you've ever been on one versus a standard ladder, way more productive. And then you can go into the scissor lifts. You have indoor outdoor rating now, obviously, with the new standard. And then you go into RT scissors. And then you go into articulated booms. And then you go into the straight booms. Okay. And now if you get the new ones, you have load sensing. If you have the old ones, you don't. So there's a wide variety in the marketplace to get people in the air. Keep in mind, there's also ladders or scaffold. But when you look at MEWPs, it is really a great alternative. And if I had a scaffold company, and I would strongly be considering it, especially in today's climate where there used to be like 10 OEMs. And with the consolidation of the rental industry, they kind of shrunk. And there's probably 3 major players in the US market. But I think you have people who are wanting to import machines into the market to get a slice of the pie. And so you're seeing a bigger group of manufacturers that want to enter the US market. That is opportunity for someone who wants to get into the excess segment as far as MEWPs. And if you think about the full gamut that you have to offer, you might start with low level access. You know, if you sell ladders, to get one of these machines and put it in your showroom, you can actually get a small trailer and your rep can take it and demo it. You're selling solutions, the safer solutions. And Ron gave some examples. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's, as a JLG rep for 18 years and being in the business, I know these things happen. And, speaking from the point of what's the purpose of lifts? Safety and productivity. Okay. And that is an easy sell. Okay, it's a really easy sell, especially if you hear the statements like someone Ron says. And now you break down the numbers of it and you go, well, just like the guy down the road in the extension ladder today, he probably didn't have the money to rent an 80-foot boom. Okay, or maybe he hasn't had a good rep calling him that gives him the training he needs. We don't like operating machines that we're not comfortable with. Nobody does. Like, I'm going to put me in the air and I'm like, this thing can drive and it can do this and it's got an alarm that goes off on my level. That just scares me. And so that training curve, compare it to this. If you're really comfortable with your shovel, right, and digging a hole, and then you look at a mini excavator and you go, man, that thing looks complicated. That's heavy. That's expensive. But until you get in it and feel it and you go, I don't ever want that shovel again. My back's not going to hurt tomorrow. And, there's a benefits, and all equipment is to create that productivity. Oh, I got 10 more holes dug with the excavator than I did yesterday with my hand shovel. Think of the aerial access way in that way. And the new standard is important. And I don't know how well it's taking off. I can tell you, I deal in the business every day. I talk to rental companies and people in the business all day. I don't hear a lot about the training portion, which is really, that's the cool portion. Nothing against any rep or anybody that rents, I mean, I'm guessing that they don't know exactly.
Yeah,
all the details.
training's not actively being talked about on the street, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no, it's
Not actively being talked about on the street.
yeah.
So,
Hey,
and
hey,
I know what you're getting at here, which is an incredible point, is the industry looks at access equipment not as an asset. It's not something that makes them money. It is something that they need in order to get somewhere, in order to use a tool to make them money, right? So in essence, access equipment is really looked at as a job site commodity. It's a luxury item, it's a convenience, but it's not something that's, you know, being utilized to produce income. So if in the scaffolding plus model, and if you have one of our members that are, you know, thinking, you know, I have had people ask me to rent them. If they're where do they start? You know, are there 4 scissor lifts for every 1 boom lift? Is the low level access market going to be 10 low levels crawling around a skyscraper? You know, to every 1 boom lift that's on the project? What do you see the market to look like there?
Well, the answer to that is I look at it in very simple terms. Your business is built around your relationships. So do you start with 4 scissors? Do you start with the telehandler? Do you start with a boom, a straight or articulated? Go take your customer to lunch and say, hey,
Yeah.
we've been doing well with you in this area. What if we decided to grow with you? Just one customer. We want to grow with you in this area. And he shares with you how much money he saves by renting, how much his guys like this brand or this does this. And you get close to him. And then when he says, you know what, I'll give you $2,500 a month for that lift, and I average about 4 months of rent a year on it. Then you drill back when you talk about scaling your business, because as great as it sounds, it is about the money. We're not going to buy a bunch of equipment to make the world a better place and be broke. Okay. Nobody's going to do that. So the safety sells. And so now we know the parameters. Now we need to find the right lift for this guy. We need to spend the money to train our people as far as a service aspect. And you know, I think about the service training side of it. You know, there's a huge population of lifts out there. How many people do you think aggressively go after annual inspections, 30-day inspections, you know, all the things that maintenance and repairs need to be done with these?
Right.
Nobody does it. So if you did grow into this business, there's an opportunity. And you know what? Maybe that's where you start with your 2 key customers. And then if you know all the people in town that have a lot of rental equipment, you make a call to them and you go, if your shop gets busy, I've got a certified tech. Would you let me do your annual inspections? Or if you have a hard down unit and your shop doesn't have time, I'll make you a deal and I'll get your boom rental ready again. And so there's a number of revenue streams, and it's a very competitive environment. You said the word commodity. There's, you know, and it is. I can tell you that you take a 19-foot scissor in the 90s, it rented for $1,000 a month, and guys bought them for about $9,000. Okay. That same scissor lift today sells for about 10.5, 11 grand. And I think everybody's pretty confidential on this board. I mean, those are real numbers, but I think I'm in the ballpark. But that scissor will go for 300 to 350 a month, maybe 400. I don't know, but I just know the word on the street that's coming to go for. So you used to get 1,000, you paid the same money now, it says, but they're making it up in the volume. And oh, by the way, I don't really feel like spending 11, 12 grand on a scissor. I bet you can find a really good one for $6,500.
Yeah, what I heard you just say, and what you were trying to draw a connection to, is that it has commoditized so much that the price of the equipment has only gotten more expensive, but the price of the rental has become significantly less because of the competition in the market. So you have to be really strategic on your spend. You got to be strategic in how you're doing your purchasing, but you're scaling your business really just from the standpoint of the relationship you have, the time that you're on that job site, the value you're able to add. If you know the GC of the contractor has an agreement with a rental company and something happens, and you can just step right in there and solve that problem for that GC on a temporary basis, and you're still scaling your business.
You're selling productivity and safety. And if you run your fleet with the right customer base, you can be profitable in this. You know, if everybody could make money and get the return they need on $100 scissor lift, the people that are in it every day benefit, because some of the alternatives are more dangerous. So I wouldn't want to create an unprofitable industry or want you to have an unprofitable rental fleet with access equipment, but know your purpose. It's to help the guy get up in the air safer and be more productive. And it is about money. It's about money on time and getting the job done. It's about money of what it costs for me to buy it and rent it. And I don't think the price thing is, I mean, there's so much emphasis on rental rate and price that I think a lot of the people that go rent the stuff every day, they lose focus of the real purpose of the equipment. And I think once you circle back to why this lift makes sense for your job and you're providing solutions for that job for that guy, I don't think price is concerned anymore. But I think a lot of people say price is the deal. No, if you work with the guys, and I used to have to do familiarization training, and none of the really equipment dealers like doing that with end users. And as a rep for an OEM, I would have to go in and do it. And I was always so impressed of how knowledgeable the operators that are on it every day are of the machines. They can tell me when they made this change on this, when this counterweight changed and that jib changed or these controls changed. They're on the machines every day. They get really comfortable and familiar with them. And therefore they're driving the deals in rental. You know, that's why I'll rent it from XYZ, A, B, C, D. They all have the same lifts. It does the same thing. And they've solved their solutions. And I think if we could get to the point, and that's why I like the new standard from the training portion, you have to do a pre-inspection of the job. And to keep this entertaining, I put up a pole barn this week, over the last 8 days. I had a telehandler, I had lifts, I had a tractor with a bucket, I had a trencher on the job, and I love the equipment, and I love to see the productivity. Some of the guys working for me, they still preferred that ladder. That boom lift scared them. That telehandler scared them. So they're climbing up ladders, and I'm like, oh man, why? Get in the boom. It's easier. Well, you know what? Once they got comfortable and they understood the controls and they weren't so stubborn on it, they found it was much easier, safer, and enjoyable work. And so that's the education you have to overcome with a lot of things with this. And that's why we have, you know, the outside reps in the industry. And you know, for a scaffold guy, you know, the contractors, all you have to do is, you know, take the relationship a step further. And if the rates are depressed and you can't make money on new, find quality used and be a part of it for your customers, and then be the expert, right? And then fill in the back end and service and be a great service provider. You know, and those are some of the things that I think are just basic and easy. And if you look at market share reports or Roush, I don't know if the committee gets those reports. You look at how many scissor lifts are in the U.S. right now. It's huge. You look at how many,
640,000 are floating around out there.
Yep. So with that being said, there is a lot of opportunity to get in the right machine for the right price and to strengthen your relationship or grow new customers. You know, I just saw a guy with a ladder. I know he needs an 80-foot boom. I know he does. They probably can't afford it, but what are the solutions would he have? And when you're putting people in the air, I mean, you just listen to Ron's example. I mean, I think of the safety part of it, productivity, all that stuff that's the name of our game. And that's why we have the equipment.
Hey, Phil, this is Ron. I want you to touch base on, sorry, Forrest, about utilization of technology in the way to enhance a training program, from virtual reality, augmented reality, to be able to build a training solution into your Scaffolding Plus, to be able to take you as a provider and give you the opportunity to basically sell the safety part of the service to an owner that is very safety sensitive, to separate you from the competition? What would a rental company do? How would they go about really enhancing that sell point to a very owner sensitive organization, safety sensitive organization? Thanks.
Well, it's a very reactive industry, Ron. So what's going to drive it is the customer says, I want it. Okay. If you have a great customer and you know he's going to need about this many lifts on a job coming up, and they demand it, or we're not renting from there, then you'll see that change. When it comes to the virtual training for the operator training, I think that is great for like the book part of it, but the job assessment, how soft's the turf? I can tell you on my little pole barn job site, my outrigger sunk in the mud and I could not get I was down. I cannot operate that telehandler. And so the more educated that the end users become, the more they're going to drive the owners. Nobody likes adding cost to their business. We all want to be safe. They all want to be safe. But if let's say Forrest has a company that has aerial lifts and I have a company, I am offering state-of-the-art safety, all the stuff, but all of a sudden it comes down to the final bill of the month of what I need for all my equipment, and Forrest is that much cheaper and he wins the deal. How excited am I about spending all this money on training and certifications, doing what I'm supposed to do for a job site if I'm not getting my returns, I'm not getting paid on it. Okay. That's where I think it has to be end user driven. Okay. So I would tell you that you mentioned Turner. Somebody mentioned Turner. If you look at the major contractors, when they say, I only want a boom that has the new standard in it, they'll get it. But until then, guys are going to rent the old standard booms if they have them. They have to make their money back on them if they've spent the money. But end user driven requests tend to move the model to where it is. That goes back with anything. If you look at the crush guard, the crush guard, we talked about the scissor lift example. Somebody brought up the scissor lift example where the guy was going up and he got pinned. Well, when crush guard first came out, I remember working with guys and like, oh, I don't want that option. Don't put that on. There'll be something else will go wrong. And it'll be 2 service calls that I got to make because the machine's not working right. You know what changes? One accident or one end user says, I got to have that on the machine. Now, guess what? We got retrofit kits to put them on an old machine. It's standard on new booms. But it's all end user driven. The OEMs are prepared. I mean, they're willing to do this because you ask them when you see something that happened, like in Ron's example, ask them what that cost everybody as far as, and nobody, I mean, the moments of silence, we've had 2 of them. I'm like, oh, Christy, I'm like, yeah, that stuff is hard to hear and I don't like it for anybody. At the same time, the real initiative is driven from the end user. And nothing against our distribution in the rental business of access. There's a lot of emphasis on safety, but there's as much emphasis on profitability. I know I don't want that to sound selfish, but it's a competitive model. I mean, nobody gets in business not to make money. And I feel like if you have a competitive advantage that you offer some of the more safety training, all that stuff, and you get rewarded, then that's great. But the people that offer it and then they don't get rewarded, that's when they look at their balance sheet. Well, we got to,
what I'm hearing you say in that is that there's such a within our industry, there's these very broad long-term contracts that get written between 2 companies. And in those contracts, what gets lost is that personal relationship and that time face on the job site and listening to what the customer's needs are. And what you've really been describing for us is really how to scale this business model if it's something you're looking into. And the biggest way to be a disruptor to those large contracts that may exist is not to try to take the big contract away, but to fill the gap, right? To understand what the contractor is needing or the GC is looking for. Perhaps you're on site, perhaps you've had a maintenance contract, you're putting in scaffolding, you sit through all the safety meetings, and like Ron said, you hear that there's a genuine interest in VR technology and safety that's taking place. Utilize the AWP Council resources. Take a deeper look into that. Take a look into, can you provide value to your client? The resources are there, and the customer ultimately, through solutions-based selling, is, I think the kind of the coined phrase that gets used in the industry when you're solution-based selling. Your customer will tell you exactly what they need, how much they're willing to pay for it, and what their expectations are. And I think it's really going to come down to now just understanding from you, how do you finance one of these business options? What are the things that you have to consider in financing options?
Well, the financing options is just so you can enter it and be profitable. You can, if you go the used route, you have to understand the term that, if you're, let's just say you're not heavy in cash and you're going to have to borrow money to be in this, you got to understand the end value of the machine. So I'll just use a 60-foot boomer example. We got a new one for 55. I can tell you that thing will always be worth 17 to 20,000 in rent ready, safe condition. So you've got to get your money back on a certain gap so you don't get upside down in your machine. But the cost of getting in the business isn't quite as expensive if you're calculated and understand your financing options. I've heard of balloon payments on new machines that extend the life cycle. Well, we know it's going to be struggling in the first 5 years on a new machine. Well, maybe if I put a balloon on that and only finance the front hand, knowing there's good residual value data that the banks know and the finance people know about, now my risk is this much. Understanding your risk, knowing knowing the people that lend money in this, it's pretty, there's a lot of options. If you look at just from a net transaction value versus a rental rate, it probably doesn't look that excitable. Like, I don't know how I can offer this to my customers and be profitable with all this extra cost and do this. So I think understanding the financing piece is just as important as speccing the equipment in this, because if you're not profitable, then you can't go spend the money on all the stuff it takes to actually be in the business. But don't be fearful, because there's a lot of machines out there now, and you can get in the right machines to kind of get your feet in the water with it and let your customer drive the conversation. You have the conversation, let him drive what he wants. And I can't wait to see the low level access portion of this industry take off. And there's emerging lifts, there's emerging things to broaden applications that are safer and different things. I think there's self-leveling chassis booms now. Well, you know how many times I see people drive a machine up to make it level? And that's, he's one touch of the controller away from having a really bad situation, right? Well, now they have self-leveling chassis booms. Guess how well they're going over? Not too popular, because I'm adding cost to the business and nobody's going to pay me the rental rate. That's unfortunate that those products don't get out there, more than they do, but we're all in business to make money, and we can't just be a great service to people and then not get paid on it. And so that's why how it scales, your financing, those kind of things. And when you invest in your trucks, when you invest in your shop, you can look at that as a revenue stream. Now you have a sales call that says, look, there's end user people that own machines. You need to do an annual inspection on that. Bring it into my shop, let me do it. And you can turn some of this into a revenue stream that you view as cost. A lot of the rental companies view maintenance and that trucking 100% cost. And so I think if I was to enter the business, if I had a scaffold company, I would want to make my shop revenue, and I would want any big rental companies that have access equipment in the marketplace, I want to make them my friend. I want to be a legit competitor to them, but at the same time, I want to offer them solutions like, hey, I have invested in my shop and things. If you have any overflow in your shop and you're busy, let me work on your machine. So I think there's a number of avenues if you want to get in this business that you can pursue that will help it scale. Because at the end of the day, we're in business to make money, and what feels like a cost and what feels like a lot of money outlay, you can do it in a smaller scale and be affordable and then grow bigger.
And I think I really like one of the last points you hit on, which was having a good relationship with the large rental companies, because I can only use my personal experience in the Houston market. And I know 3 small independent shops that I believe they have somewhere around 50 to 60 units in their yard each, around 20 booms. That's a pretty nice little fleet. I mean, that's not a cheap fleet of equipment. 100% of their business is with 2 rental companies. They don't communicate to end users. They don't market. They don't do anything. They simply have the equipment there because one of the large majors has a large contract, but that particular day they don't have a boom left. So they call up this independent company. That independent company ships the boom off for them, and it's a total re-rent business model, because the larger companies have an obligation to keep 100% coverage with their customers. So in the scaffolding plus model, it really does create a unique opportunity that not only are you building a tighter relationship with your end user and your contractors and your GC, you're also being able to create a second revenue stream with somebody that may have previously been looked at as a competitor. And I can't quite frankly think of anything better than taking money from somebody that may or may not be my competitor, right? And having a healthy friendship, a genuine friendship. But there's cost, right? I mean, you got people, equipment, and training. And Phil, tell us more about it. I know we're nearing the end, and I'm curious into what the 2022 market looks like. But what are the basic costs? What do we need to know?
Well, after COVID, of course, everything got shut off, from engines to steel. And if you look at material costs, it's outrageous. And so there's a big jam up right now. Used equipment values are up. Most of the new OEMs, I think, are backlogged, probably into fall on most models. So the digestion of getting caught up comes with time. And I think a year from now, there's going to be a lot more of, let's say, an ideal situation. And I think you have some new OEMs wanting to enter the US market. I think there's some things that stall that, but there's going to be more than a couple options for access equipment in this market. And with that is opportunity, because with the consolidation of, let's just say the national accounts. I mean, if you go, I mean, I did it on a podcast. I love the RER Top 100 and listen, it's just looking at who the players are. And I break them down by category. Like, there's equipment dealers, and then there's just pure rental companies. And then, like, equipment dealer would be like a cat rental store or one of those guys. But they also have a dealer line, like a Bobcat dealer who also has rental equipment and access equipment. And then you got like your mom and pop rentals. And so you take the scaffold group. So let's just say I'm a rep for a manufacturer of access equipment. Who am I going to go call on if I want to get my market share, or I want to get my piece of the pie in these segments? I mean, they look for people that want to represent and do this the right way. And there's plenty of them out there, but there's always room for more. Ironically, there's an extension ladder 2 blocks from downtown St. Joe, and it's up there, man. It's probably 60 foot or 45 foot or whatever it is. I'm like, yeah. So, there's always room for growth in this business. And if you wanted to, timing a market is tough, but I will tell you that the used market is going to become more plentiful 18 months from now. And because of the bigger players in the market, they control such a massive amount of fleet, and they're getting choked up on new right now. So once the new gets caught up, and then you can find, and when you buy used, you better have a good shop. You have to make sure that it's going to be safe and rent ready, but you're getting in it for less money, which allows you to be profitable at some of today's rentals rates. So, I mean, I think when you look at the bills, and I don't like politics or none of that, but they're pumping some real money into infrastructure. And if you pay attention to infrastructure, it's mostly construction for the most part. I mean, we know that the construction industry drives a lot in our economy. So I feel fairly bullish that things are going to remain good for a while, and perhaps your time to enter the market, and timing is everything, within, the next 18 months would be a good time to look at it. And I look at it the same way. And I I'm not speaking this like I have started a lot of rental companies in my experience there, and I watch them grow. I watch them start with 4 scissor lifts, and then they add their first boom lift, and then they want a bigger boom lift, and then they want a handler. Then we have to buy another truck. Now we have to hire 2 more techs. Now we need a new field service. I watched them grow and scale it and do it, and it's exciting to watch. And remember, you're selling solutions, more productivity, a safer workplace, working in the air. Because what alternatives do you have? You're going to walk steel. That's you're going to get a ladder. That's an option, but it might not be the safest or most productive option with the amount of lifts that are out there. So, that's just kind of my insight. And you can say I'm full of shit. I probably am, but at the same time, I feel good about it.
Short-sighted, being very short-sighted. If somebody in the audience or a participant today is thinking, yeah, I'm kind of in that situation, right? There's been discussions. Is this right now today, is this a time to buy, or is this a time to plan because of supply chain issues and what's going on with, if, outsiders that don't have their thumb on the industry the way you do, is this a time to buy today? What's going to be happening in 2022?
I think you start with the plan, you start with the customers. And let me just add some kind of personal touch to this. I've coached both my boys in Bantam youth football. And man, we practice 3 days a week, and we learn how to run that, that outside tackle run play. And when you snap the ball and the kids go every which way they do and complete chaos looks like it's happening, I would say just go ahead and plan on some of that too as you get into it, because when your customers are driving, you're trying to learn it, expect some chaos, but plan right. And I'd say I think that in the next 18 months, it's affordable, because if your business is not going to scale and you can't make money, you don't want to mess with it. And it's competitive out there. I mean, if you go talk to most people, there's not enough room. There's not enough room. But you know what? I just don't ever see them where they're really getting a bad financial situation. Some of them have. Now, depending on if you didn't plan right and you spent too much money on this category and it's not renting or whatever. But it just feels like the growth keeps happening because the manufacturers are churning it out. And if it's sitting in the yard, you have a good chance to rent it, right? And I just see the growth happening. And that's for the last 15 years. If you get on and look at some of the reports, if you can get a Roush market share report, or, you have to be a member of that to get that. They're very confidential. But if you look at how many lifts are out there, there's room. And just look at the trend over the last 15 years. So is there a bad time to get in it? Well, as long as this thing keeps scaling the way it's scaling, and if I keep seeing ladders or seeing, that secondary market, how many people would love to have one, but you know what? They only really have them in the city. They don't have them in the country. They don't have them in these small towns. They don't have them in this. So, is your selling approach with your sales team is to target some of these untapped areas that people say, I've seen them, but I've never really had a chance to rent one or be on one. There's plenty of those opportunities there. And
Ron and I talked a lot about the new ANSI standards and the gaps analysis. How does that affect cost? What's that doing to the market?
Well, it's like Ron said. I mean, if I want to be the state-of-the-art safety training with virtual reality and all this stuff, it costs money. And I think if your customer is willing to pay for it and do it, then you're in it. But I just don't see a lot of people that are going to, knowing that everybody wants to have a profitable, do everything the right way, but it all comes with a price. And the people that rent the machines, the end users that operate them, they got to be willing to ante up and pay for it. And we have plenty out there to provide it. I mean, the standard machines are there. The training programs are there. When you say VR, yeah, we can set up our rental company to have all that. But if all my machines are sitting in the yard and they come to my place and get virtual reality training, but they don't rent from me, the virtual reality training didn't make those equipment payments. And so I think that it has to be a real partnership with your customers. And that's why I say most everything is end user driven when it comes to the crush guard example, the pothole protection on the scissor years ago. There's a lot of things that can happen safety wise in the industry. And I know that every person that rents the booms or sells the booms, they want people to have it. And so do the OEMs. It's just a matter of we got to pay for it. And that's the deal.
Absolutely. Well, I think, I mean, it's been very insightful to realize that, you know, supply chain's tight, it seems, for the next 16 months. And the advantage of used versus new is going to come down to the relationship with the customer. The ANSI standards is definitely increasing price. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, 2022 is looking promising as a buyer's market, but currently we're in a seller's market as it stands today. If what could we close on before we open up for questions?
Well, I mean, just in closing, I'll say that, I mean, I wouldn't be fearful in access equipment. I mean, I think what holds a lot of people back is, well, I can't make money in it, or I have to retrain my sales team, or I have to retrain my shop. I had to go through the cost. Start simple, one customer that you're close with, and you know, if those customers are willing to share with some of the historical numbers that they do, you'll never have enough, and everybody will get a little of the love on a job, you know. And so don't feel like it is competitive, and it is competitive to make money, but don't feel like that you can't bring real solutions in your partnership with your customers, and then put it in their corner. You're gonna have to pay me more money, but I can get your guys through some real of the new ANSI standard training. I mean, you don't hear people talking about it much. And then I can tell you on the new booms, there probably isn't enough, you know, the load sensing, they're probably not enough. I think there's some guys that are tripping out booms if they have new ones and they're overloading the boom. That's the nature of the beast. And these guys, they want more productivity out of the machines. They want to get more steel put up today. They want to get more material up. They want to get more lights hung, all the things, because that's how they make their money. So these lifts help them do it. And I think sometimes that we push time out and go, look, man, you've been using that lift the wrong way. Let's go back and let me show you. And then let the light bulb hit the end user. And then it becomes more of a staple in our industry. But it takes time and it costs money.
That's great. I'm gonna at this time open us up for questions, and if you know, just leave the floor open to anybody that it's been intrigued, wants to ask something to Phil, wants to just say hi, or
Hey, Phil, this is Ron. I want to just get your opinion about potential. You know, we hear a lot in construction about labor shortages and really lack of qualified craftsmen. Let's just say as scaffold erectors. Do you see that shortage of qualified labor pushing the construction community into more utilization of lifts and platforms, because there's just not the labor force to do scaffolds, even though building a scaffold is a you know relatively simple task, it can be very complex. Do you see a lack of qualified craftsmen growing the access industry through use of equipment as an alternative?
Absolutely, 100%. That's a very accurate statement, and that's even outside of the access part. The labor is a big thing, and generally equipment allows you to do more with less labor. So that makes the equipment even more of a necessity for a job site. So yes, I'll give you an example. I was I'm dealing with some folks in Missouri, like in a consulting way, and a guy said this, he's a big contractor. He says, I just can't find people that want to work. You know, I'm backlogged out. I can't get my jobs cut up. I have people to work. And I'm talking about, and he says, I'm talking about simple jobs, like they're carrying buckets around and they're doing this. And I'm like, you know, because I don't really know a lot about the guy. I'm like, wait a minute, you know, they make a machine so a guy didn't have to carry buckets. You'll probably find guys that want to come to work because nobody wants to carry a bucket today. You know, that's physical manual labor. They don't like that. And so I think that when I say the growing aspect of rental equipment or access equipment or any equipment, it ain't like some of you brought up the baby boomer thing, and things are different. And especially when it comes to labor or work or things like that, I think kids and younger generations, they will adapt very well to equipment. And that's from a technical standpoint. If you look at most machines now, you can take a handheld device, plug it in, and get a troubleshooting code. You don't have to get a lot of the, flow meters and fluke meters out. I mean, the computer is going to tell you, hey, go change that switch. And so things have evolved to make it more convenient. An example, and oh, by the way, if you want to be a technician on access equipment, you can make a really good living. That's a great career path, and then nobody should ever think bad about choosing a career path working in the shop of a rental store where you work on access equipment. You're a very valuable person, and I think that they're rewarded that way as far as a scale of pay. But you got to be good at it. You got to care about it like anything else. That answer your question?
Low level art. Who was that?
Yeah, does that make sense, Ron? Are we good with that?
Yeah, that's really critical and important. I know in our local area in Texas City, our school district just funded an industrial trade center to get those young people that, college isn't for everyone, to get them into the industrial trades and get them connected with contractors. And just looking at those type of solutions, are extremely important. I know even in our Texas area, with our Texas Workforce Commission, they worked a deal with the Texas Workforce Commission that contractors can hire these kids, and the state of Texas through the Workforce Commission will pay them for 12 weeks at $14 an hour, no cost to the employer, for the 12 weeks through the summer to give them some job experience, to be able to continue a career in the trade. So, there's those type of workforce development initiatives are extremely important for those that don't want to go to college. And like you said, you can earn a really good living, and there's value to that. And we need to look at it differently. We need to put some statute with it that, you're a craftsman, and that's an important, honorable task. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was said slightly as a joke, but there's some genuine sincerity to what you said, Phil. The job site of the future, because of the low level access industry and some of the technology being brought out by various OEMs, really may look like, you come to the job box and you have 15 people and they're all standing on their own low level access unit, and they've got their tool bags and they've got their tools and everything's in there. And then the toolbox talk's done and they don't walk off. They all just turn their low level access and start driving to where they're going to be going on that job site that day to start performing their work. And they already have all their tools and material with them. It is incredible to see what technology in the MEWP space is coming out. And I think you said it as a joke, but we may quite likely see people quit walking around the job site. And I think people in the trades would be more adept to almost find it cool or innovative to hop on that equipment and not be burdened by having to lug the 50 or 60 pounds a quarter mile to the other side of the job site, as I believe all of us in the industry had to ourselves.
Yeah, well, I love the lifts, and the more you're around, I mean, like I say, that low level access in general is yet to take off, but there's plenty of opportunity for everybody to get involved in it, because there's a ton more applications every day where guys could use them. And, to replace a ladder costs money, but I think when you start looking at the way things scale, and what one fall could cost someone. So you got to know what that total cost means.
Hey, Phil, since I have a question for you about the customers wanting multi-use functionality to machines and aerial lifts.
1 minute on time, 1 minute warning.
Yeah, do you see that where OEMs are going to be able to pick that up, where those lifts can do multiple things as opposed to just providing access?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anything with more productivity. I can, I'm not going to bring up OEMs, but I'll tell you that I know of a rotating machine with forks on it, and you can get the handheld control and put a platform on it and put a lot of weight in it, and it has load sensing. I can tell you that there's prototype machines that actually have a welder up in the platform that can be conform to the steel specs on the job as far as from a drum. There's so many advances out there. Keep in mind, it all comes with money. And so, yeah, when you talk about a sizzle, I mean, I've heard of forklifts that have you've seen them that have a platform, and then all of a sudden you have a cable and a winch to lift material up, right? That has a rated capacity in it. So you're always selling productivity, always. And the safer, the more you get done in a day, the more profitable that contractor is, and the more safe it is. I mean, there's so many upside to this evolution of equipment. You know, I see that it all advancing and keep going, and I love it. I like to see it. And just this week, I bring up this pole barn thing. Man, I love getting in lifts, and it was fun. Hell, I was only 4 foot off the ground, but I sure as hell wasn't getting on a ladder. I guarantee you that. I really like being up in the lift. I can move around. I can walk around. And then the old guys that had their ladders, I'm like, man, you know how dangerous that is. I'm not going to tell you. This is much safer. And they think I'm crazy about lifts, and I am crazy about lifts. But then, you know what? One of them gets in it and they go, well, that's a lot easier than I thought it'd be. I'm like, yeah, it is, you know, and it's safer. So,
Phil Dwayne, thank you, sir. Thank you
Okay,
so
guys.
much for your passion
Hey.
for this industry. Thank you for
Thank you,
coming on
Phil.
board.
Great.
okay, thanks for having me, guys.
Ron, we so appreciate having you on as our co-chair, and we look forward to all the work we'll be doing together. Phil, come see
You're
us annual, right? All right, consider being more than just a friend of the SAI. Come become a member.
Yep.
For everybody else in the audience, we're going to start transitioning, moving forward from speaking about the gaps analysis here at committee and annual, and we're going to create it more into a working group. We'll provide updates moving forward. So if you can please get onto the mobile app, any questions you have today, if you want to start a conversation, or topics of discussions and action items. A lot got discussed today. We did the overview on the gaps and what that's made up. Ron gave background into the thinking of OSHA and ACOSH and how all of that really needs to come to mind during the development. Phil talked about adding a new business stream, right? Becoming scaffolding plus, or just developing out your rental business to a greater level. If any of those topics created a question in your mind, reach out, please email me, get onto the mobile app, start a conversation, and just let us know what we need to be working on and preparing for a convention that's going to add value to you and your business. We're not here for any other reason than to support one another. And we really appreciate you joining us today. For those that are in Florida, please, have a nice beverage on the beach for me. Very sorry that I was unable to make this one, and I look forward very much to seeing y'all all at the convention. Y'all have a wonderful day, and thank you.
I'd like to thank you all. You did a phenomenal job. Very informative.
Thank you, Forrest. Great job. Thank you.